In this video, we will talk about nutrients beyond absorption, and in particular about diets and macronutrients. Diets serve as guidelines or recommendations regarding the consumption of macronutrients, that is, about the consumption of carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Diets can recommend which foods we should consume to obtain macronutrients, how much energy we should ingest, and which percentage of energy each of these macronutrients should provide. They may also recommend when we should ingest the macronutrients. Let's start with the recommendations which healthy diets give about the foods we should eat to obtain carbohydrates. Foods rich in carbohydrates are, for example, table sugar, bread, cereals, rice, or potatoes. Healthy diets recommend reducing or eliminating simple carbohydrates such as table sugar, white flour, or white rice, and to obtain complex carbohydrates from whole grains and vegetables. And why do healthy diets recommend eating foods rich in complex carbohydrates such as whole wheat bread, but to avoid simple carbohydrates such as white bread or sugar? The main reason is that complex carbohydrates are long chains of monosaccharides that require more time to be digested, and consequently, the biomolecules that compose them, mainly glucose, are released and absorbed slowly. In addition, foods high in complex carbohydrates are also high in fiber, which also slows glucose absorption, preventing insulin spikes, and rendering the provision of energy by these foods more continuous and long-lasting. The glucose that is absorbed can be used by organs such as the brain, and very little remains, which is not used immediately and stored as fat in adipose tissue. The simple carbohydrates of white bread take much less time to digest, so the glucose that composes them is released and absorbed more quickly without being able to be used by organs such as the brain fast enough. Therefore, there is more excess glucose stored as fat. The intake of table sugar, which does practically not require any digestion, leads to fast release and almost immediate absorption of glucose, which can practically not be used, and therefore it is stored in the form of fat. In addition, the fiber content, which can slow down the absorption of glucose, is very low in white bread and zero in table sugar. And what do diets tell us about the best foods for proteins? These are the 20 amino acids that make up human proteins. 10 of these amino acids can be synthesized by humans because they are encoded in our genetic code, so it is not necessary to incorporate them through the diet. For this reason, they are considered non-essential. The other 10 amino acids cannot be synthesized, and therefore we must incorporate them through the diet. They are known as essential amino acids. Proteins from foods of animal origin contain all the essential amino acids and are therefore considered high-quality proteins. Many plant-based foods, however, tend to lack one or more amino acids. For example, wheat has no lysine and very little threonine, while legumes have no methionine. In order to synthesize proteins, we need all the essential amino acids. So it is important to eat foods that contain all of them or combine foods to compensate for the deficiencies. If we mix vegetables with products of animal origin, there is no problem, but for vegetarians and vegans, it is something that they should keep in mind and combine, for example, legumes with cereals to ensure that they consume all the essential amino acids. Some products such as soybeans, tofu, quinoa, spirulina, chia, amaranth, or buckwheat have recently become fashionable in Western societies because, despite being foods of plant origin, they contain all the essential amino acids and are therefore very interesting for vegetarians and vegans. And finally, we are going to see which foods healthy diets recommend as a source of lipids. Foods rich in lipids are, for example, coconut, bacon, butter, avocado, olive oil, sunflower oil, nuts, or oily fish. Healthy diets recommend obtaining lipids from foods such as avocado, olive oil, seed oils, nuts, or oily fish, and reducing or eliminating other foods such as coconut, bacon, or butter. The fatty acids contained in food can be of two types, saturated or unsaturated, and the unsaturated in turn are divided into monounsaturated or polyunsaturated. Foods rich in saturated fatty acids are, for example, coconut, bacon or butter, in monounsaturated fatty acids, avocado and olive oil, and in polyunsaturated fatty acids, sunflower oil, nuts or oily fish. Saturated fatty acids are characterized by being solid at room temperature, and this is because, due to their completely straight structure, they can be highly compacted. Monounsaturated fatty acids have a double bond in their structure that causes them to have a certain curvature. Due to this curvature, monounsaturated fatty acids cannot be compacted as the saturated ones and leave some space between them, which gives them fluidity. For this reason, they are liquid at room temperature. Polyunsaturated fatty acids have several double bonds, so they still have more curvature and consequently more fluidity. Trans fatty acids are polyunsaturated fatty acids with artificially modified double bonds to avoid their curvature, which results in straight structures that can be compacted and are solid at room temperature. Foods rich in trans fatty acids are margarines. The most important lipids are triglycerides, formed by a glycerol and 3 fatty acids, phospholipids, made up of a glycerol attached to a phosphate group and 2 fatty acids, and cholesterol. Lipids have very important functions in our body, such as protect the skin, allow the synthesis of molecules such as certain hormones, allow absorption of fat-soluble vitamins such as vitamin D, and they are the major component of the brain and of the myelin that covers the axons. In addition, phospholipids form cell membranes that envelop cells, separating their content from the environment. As we have commented a moment ago, phospholipids are made up of a glycerol that has a phosphate group associated with it and 2 fatty acids that can be saturated or unsaturated. The glycerol with the phosphate group is a part of the phospholipid that loves water, while the fatty acids hate it and therefore repel it. For this reason, phospholipids in cell membranes form lipid bilayers where glycerol together with the phosphate group are arranged towards the outside, while fatty acids are arranged towards the interior. Unsaturated fatty acids, due to their curvature, allow the insertion into the membranes of another very important lipid, such as cholesterol, which gives fluidity, flexibility, and stability to the membranes, while reducing their permeability. In a hypothetical situation in which we only ingested saturated fatty acids, we would have cell membranes in which the insertion of cholesterol would not be possible, and consequently the membranes would lack fluidity, flexibility, or stability and be extremely permeable, which would be very negative for the cells. This is one of the reasons, although not the only one, why saturated fatty acids are not recommended. Diets can also recommend how much energy we should ingest and what percentage of this energy each of the macronutrients should provide. Healthy diets such as the Mediterranean diet, but also vegetarian or vegan diets, recommend reducing energy intake and obtaining around half of the energy from carbohydrates, between 30 and 35% from lipids, and between 12 and 15% from proteins. Other diets, such as the Paleolithic and ketogenic diets, are based precisely on a different recommendation regarding the macronutrients that we must ingest to obtain energy. According to these diets, 70% of the energy we need should be obtained from lipids, 20% from proteins, and only 10% from carbohydrates. And what is the logic behind this recommendation? Well, the reason differs in these two diets. The Paleolithic diet bases this recommendation on the idea that during evolution humans have been hunters and gatherers for more than 2 million years, while farming and keeping livestock has only come about 12,000 years ago. This major change in lifestyle has influenced the amount and type of food. The Paleolithic diet considers that our body had much more time to adapt to food from hunting and gathering than to food from agriculture and livestock, so the latter can be more harmful. The Paleolithic diet therefore recommends consuming foods that were common prior to the development of agriculture and livestock, such as berries, vegetables, seeds, bushmeat, oily fish, or fruit oils, while it recommends avoiding products that come from agriculture and livestock, such as cereals, dairy products, sugar, or potatoes. What it means to recommend a very low consumption of carbohydrates, since cereals, which are the main source, are eliminated, and a high consumption of lipids and proteins. The ketogenic diet, however, recommends higher fat and lower carbohydrate intake for a different reason. During fasting between meals, which is usually less than 12 hours, we consume glucose, protein, and part of the fat that we had stored to obtain the energy we need. Glycerol from fat is used to produce glucose, while fatty acids from fat go to organs and tissues that can use them as source of energy. If the fasting is prolonged beyond 12 hours, the mobilization of fat is increased in order to continue obtaining energy. The glycerol from this fat continues to go to the liver to produce glucose, while the fatty acids continue to go to tissues and organs that can use them as source of energy. But in order to ensure sufficient energy supply, fatty acids are also directed to the liver, where they participate in the production of ketones that go to the blood and can be used as energy source by many tissues and organs, including the brain. Ketones also seem to have a neuroprotective effect, so their production is considered beneficial. The ketogenic diet tries to reproduce the production of ketones that occurs during prolonged fasting through a diet, which is very low in carbohydrates, that is, in glucose, and very rich in lipids, that is, in glycerol and fatty acids. Finally, we have fasting diets, which are diets that do not recommend which type of foods we should eat or regarding energy intake, but only when to eat, that is, regarding time. Intermittent fasting with a time-restricted eating pattern is one of the most popular fasting diets. It recommends us not to eat for a minimum period of 12 hours. And what is the reason for this recommendation? The reason is that fasting for more than 12 hours induces the formation of neuroprotective ketones and therefore can have a neuroprotective effect. In addition, fasting reduces fat that is pro-inflammatory, and therefore this diet can also have an anti-inflammatory effect.